So, on today's episode, we're going to be talking to all the 9 to 5ers who are feeling like, I want to make more money, but this damn job is just not letting me do this. I have brought on an expert career coach who is going to be telling us how she more than doubled her salary in 10 months by job hopping. I am a huge fan of job hopping. For me, it was the way that I increased my salary by about 85% in about a 7-year time span. And coming from a traditional first gen household, leaving your job and job hopping was seen as something very taboo, something you don't do. My parents have both worked at their places of employment for decades. I've had other elders in the family who like literally started working at places since they were 18 and they retired from there. So I think there's this new wave, especially when we're talking about millennials and just younger folks who are realizing that loyalty does not pay. And we're going to be talking about all of that and more today with Carla. Carla, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Janice. I am so thrilled to be here, and I've been a huge fan for a long time. So thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here. I would love for you to start us off with an introduction. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we're going to dive into your backstory about how you made all this extra money with job hopping.
Thank you for sure. So my name is Carla Santamaria. My pronouns are she, her, hers. You can call me Carla. Most people do. So I am originally from Honduras. I was born in Honduras and moved to Miami when I was 8 years old. Like every first gen kid, I was raised with this belief that education was the key to a better life.
Mhm.
So education, education, just go to school. So that's what I did. I was a straight A student. I actually remember sometime in first or second year when we moved to the US, my dad sat me down and he was like, all of this in Spanish was like telling me, in the United States, school is really expensive, so you need to make sure that you get a scholarship. So since like fifth grade, I was like, scholarship, got it. And that's what I did. I got good grades all through school, got a scholarship for undergrad, got scholarship for grad school. I still have student loans from grad school, but that was how I was raised. I was raised to think that that was the key to a better life, a job in an office. That's all that my parents wanted for me. I mean, obviously, like they want me to be happy and everything, but they just work very physically demanding jobs out in the sun. You know, you live in Florida, it's so hot here. And I just remember seeing them like sweat in their physically demanding jobs. And like, just I remember them telling me, like, just go to school so you can get a good job in an office with AC. That was what I did. That's what I thought I wanted. I thought I wanted to help people. I had this belief that I needed to give back to my community. That's how I find myself in higher education in Miami, paying $150 per tolls on tolls per month, making $51,000 a year with a master's degree.
Damn. So many folks that I've talked to in this podcast have gotten the literally exact same message, including myself. I was a straight A student, and I don't know where the like internal ambition came from, but I think it was honestly like subconsciously seeing the instability with my parents' own careers, just them feeling like they were at the mercy of employers because they did not have the education to move around and do that stuff. So that inner drive that so many of us first gen kids feel is absolutely influenced by the struggle that we see our parents go through. And what I think happens for a lot of us is we have this false sense of if I just do X, it's going to make me happy. And so I'm curious for you because the education system, I think, is obviously a necessary part of our society, but I feel like teachers are some of the most underpaid and overworked people in our society, given the fact that y'all's jobs are so important. What was the first inkling for you that you're like, you know what? This ain't it. This can't be it because the struggle is real.
When I started my first job out of grad school, let me just say, I got paid with a paper check because for some reason everybody got paid with a paper check. That check bounced. Talk about trauma. It was like an error. The ATM read it wrong. So I always, even when I got like my first legit quote unquote job and I was making the most money I had ever been making, which was 51K a year, that first check bounced. So I always had like money trauma. Like every payday, I would look at my paycheck and like, all right, are you for sure? Like, are you there? Did you clear? So totally silly. But fast forward about a year later and we get locked down because of quarantine. And I transitioned my entire campus. I was working in higher education and the institution had multiple campuses. I transitioned my entire campus to this virtual setting. And then I was, of course, leading some of the other campuses. It ended up me and one other woman, and we sort of became the backbone because our mediocre white male director didn't know how to do jack shit. Like so much so that I actually like was having this conversation, ended up talking to his boss. I had a decent relationship with her and I was like, hey, so these are a couple of things that I noticed. We don't really have a strategy, X, Y, or Z. And so that's when we formed this like strategy group, which was fine at first. But then at one point I was like, am I just doing my boss's work for no pay and no promotion and no nothing? And I was like, kind of just sitting with that. And I was kind of really upset because he wasn't doing anything, as I said. And at the same time, my partner and I had been talking about buying a house. And I was like, well, student loans are paused, but I was here like budgeting on how much I could afford for a mortgage based on when I needed to pay my student loans back. And I had this moment of, okay, well, if I switch to an income driven repayment plan, they'll knock my student loan payment down $200 so I can have $200 more to pay for my mortgage. And then I thought, wait, what? No, I just need to make more money. And so that was the moment of like, this is not, the math ain't mathing. I am not going to sit here and extend the life of a loan and tie myself to a low paying job. Like that was the thing that just wouldn't compute in my head, that it was this low paying job that I was tying myself to so that I could be in an income driven repayment plan. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I just need to make more money. And that's when I decided to leave higher ed.
So I think a lot of folks have had this moment of realization where they're just not making enough money, but they don't understand how they can potentially pivot their skills, leverage their existing education to make a pivot, especially into a different industry. It's easy to say, oh, well, if this school's not paying you enough, like go to another institution or whatever, just stay in the same like career field, but maybe pursue a different employer. Why do you think so many people have that limiting belief of like not being able to understand how to transfer their skills to a new industry?
Because we're taught to toe the line.
Ooh.
So, yeah, we're taught. So, women of color, Latinas, Black and Brown women, first gen women, we are socialized into these low paying jobs in education, in nonprofit, in higher education. We are socialized into thinking that the only way that we can quote unquote give back to our community is by sticking to these low paying jobs. It's like, oh, I just want to help other people. And for some reason, we're taught, even though no one says this, but like the underlying message is, you are your job and you need to be good. In order to be a good person, you need to have a job where you do good. So basically, like all of us have been socialized from very young age into these fields, these careers in education and social services, that then when we realize, oh, I'm not making enough money, it doesn't even occur to us that we can take our current skills and switch. You know what occurs to us? Oh, I should go get another degree. I need to go get my master's. And then I can change. I need to go get an MBA and then I can make more money. And you know what? I see that all the time. I've been there. I remember when I was drowning, like just thinking like, how am I going to pay my student loans once these payments get on pause? And I was like, oh, maybe I should go get an MBA. And then once again, I was like, what? I'm not going to get another degree to pay for my current degree. That is ridiculous. But that's what we're told. We're told education is the key to a better life. And so once we graduate and we find ourselves in these jobs, it's like, oh shit, what do we do now? And it's like, oh, let me go get more education because it has always been the answer before. So I think that's where that belief comes from, even
Yeah.
though that is absolutely not how you succeed.
Yeah, and well, when we think about the context of how expensive education has become versus like, what boomers were paying $2,500 a semester for college, it is not the same level of investment that we are making. Like these are potentially debt that is going to follow you for the rest of your life. I know people who are in student loan debt and are retired and are having to pay social security with their fucking student loans. Like that's crazy. So I think we need to be strategic about how we invest in our education because it is not a guarantee of success. It is not a guarantee of financial freedom. And so I'm curious for you, you made that realization that I'm not going to be staying in this low paying ass job. I need to go and buy my house and make a pivot. So what did that look like for you strategically? What did you actually do? And tell us about the pivot that you made.
For sure. So once I realized that I need to get a better paying job, I need to leave higher education. And here's the thing, even though I knew I needed to leave, I was like, oh, in like a couple of years. Like I still didn't even think that I was going to leave right away. But what I decided to do is, okay, so what do I love doing? And what I have been always in my entire career before the term DEI became popular, which stands for like diversity, equity, and inclusion, I had always been doing equity-based work, like closing the civic empowerment gap and closing the education gap and the opportunity gap. And it was all equity-based work. So I was like, all right, well, let me look at like DEI jobs because it has the word, right? So what I did is I set up a job alert. So I went on Indeed and I set up a job alert, like DEI jobs in South Florida. I think at one point I also typed in equity jobs in South Florida and then it was all like finance roles. And I'm like, okay, this is the wrong keyword. Strategically and tactically, that's the thing that I did. And I started familiarizing myself with what those jobs were asking for. So then I was like, oh, what can I do in my current job to prepare myself for my next job? So I became chair of like Women's History Month committee. And I was like, and this is how I'm going to talk about it. And this is going to frame it. Like I began basically to take on projects strategically. But remember, when I made that decision to set up the keywords, this was long term. What ended up happening is that I found out I was underpaid. So Latina Equal Pay Day 2021 rolls around. And I finally had the courage to ask, hey, am I getting equal pay for equal work? And then, like my mediocre white male boss was like, I can ask HR. And so, he's like a nice-ish person, but just like not very good at his job. Anyway, it ended up being like a month's quote investigation. So if the Latina Equal Pay Day was in October, right? Come February 2022, they were like, so, Carla, when you were hired, there was this clerical error, and unfortunately, you were not getting paid, and we can't rectify it. And I was so like heartbroken. I had loved that job. I was thinking of leaving, but like long term. But I was so devastated. And then I ended up talking to one of the employee relations rep, and she was like, well, if you weren't happy with the offer, you didn't have to take it. Feel free to quit.
Oh my god.
I know. I was so livid. At this point, I'm in the middle of buying a house. And I just was like, I got off that call and I was like, Carla, do not rage quit this job. Do not rage quit this job. You needed to close on your house. But yeah, I got out of there in June of that year. So, and you know what? And this is actually, I'm going to tell you one more thing about this. I left, I gave them 4 weeks notice. So that job alert, Indeed job alerts, I know people Indeed isn't necessarily like the best platform to get a job, and I don't even recommend this in this way. But I got that job and I gave 4 weeks notice because I was like leading a campus. There was this one guy who was so mediocre, of course, like white male leading another campus. The moment that I left and he was no longer hiding behind me, he quit in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, like when I tell people, I'm like, stop giving everything to your job because it's not just your job that's exploiting you. It's your mediocre white male coworkers that
Yeah,
are
and your
hiding behind
managers,
your.
they're
Mhm.
literally hiding behind your work ethic. You're making them look good.
Exactly. So I was like, no, I need to get out of there. So I got out of there, went into healthcare. I got a DEI role in a healthcare organization. It was like, one of the largest healthcare systems in South Florida. And I freaking hated it. Like, like I hated it. It was so stuffy, literally so stuffy that I was allergic to like the mold and dust in the carpet.
Damn.
Like it was, yeah, it was so bad. And also metaphorically stuffy, like wear like suits to work. I
Mm.
hated it. The work that I was doing was also like super boring. I remember thinking, wow, I would have assigned this to like my student assistants in higher ed. Like this is not a job that you need a master's degree for. And I also started having some like interpersonal issues with my boss. And I was like, nope, I'm out of here. But before I get to that realization, because I was so desperate to leave my job in higher ed, I was like, if I just make like $65,000 a year, like I'll just be happy. That's my walk away number. So when she called me and offered me the role, she was like, oh, so, we'd like to offer you this opportunity for 65K, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, like just like mumbling, trying to negotiate, like a little, like what I don't even know. I was like, I got so small. And then she was like, do you accept? And so you just see my shoulders slump, like, yes, and so I didn't negotiate my salary because I was so desperate to leave. And then I got there and I hated it, but here's the thing. I was like, all right, Carla, you didn't negotiate. What are you going to do now? So what I did is I started researching similar roles in similar companies that required similar levels of education and similar levels of experience. And so I printed out a whole bunch of them At my 3 month check-in, I told my boss, hey, it was not my intention to accept the first offer. I really want to discuss an adjustment once we get to my 6 months. We get to my 6 months. I have my proof. I'm like, I really should be making like 95K. I have a master's degree and 7 years of full-time work experience. I really should be making closer to like 95K. And so I spoke to her and she was like, ha, 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 that's not going to happen. So she laughed at me. I was like, what?
Wow.
She laughed at me. But you know what, Janice? That wasn't even my breaking point. I ended up saying, I couldn't even believe it. I was just like, what is happening? I can't believe this lady laughed at me.
Hmm.
I mean, it was in December. So I was like, I just want to get through the holidays. So, New Year rolls around and I was like, all right, I need to get out of here because I hate this job and I hate my boss because she laughed at me. and and I know, and like at this point, I have all of these job descriptions showing that I could be making at least $30,000 more
Damn.
without any additional degrees.
Hmm.
And so what I did is I started networking. And this is what I teach with in like my podcast, and this is what I teach my clients. Like I started networking. I started going to DEI events and connecting with people on LinkedIn and talking to them. Like, hey, so I see that you're in DEI in these random ass company I've never heard of. I see that you do X, Y, or Z. I started having so many conversations because I was like, I know that there's more out there for me, but I don't know what I don't know.
Hmm.
And so I ended up having 35 coffee chats in 3 months. And at the end of that, I got an offer for 6 figures. So, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Can we talk about the power of intentionality, of just not taking no for an answer? I love that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I remember I spoke to like a lot of different recruiters, and one of them, it was a role, and the salary listed was 85K, and it was a role in a school. Like I knew this wasn't a job that I wanted, but I was like, let me take the call, and just when they ask me, let me just say I'm looking for 6 figures, and just like that practice is what made me negotiate my salary once I did get the offer that I ended up accepting. Because
Hmm.
when I told that first recruiter, I was like, I'm looking to make 6 figures. I couldn't even believe I said those words out loud. But now I'm like, no, like I know the value of my skills. I know what I can deliver to the workplace. I don't like saying I know my worth because I don't believe in like attaching our worth to money. But
Yeah.
I know my skills and experience have a value in this capitalistic society. And this value is more than the 65K that I was making.
Mm.
So I needed to just go get mine.
Okay. And so you ended up pivoting from healthcare to tech.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Are you working remotely now?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Was that
Yeah.
something that was like on your must-have list or it was like a nice to have?
It was definitely a must-have. So I was working my job that I hated in healthcare. I was working like 20 minutes from my house. That was one of the things that I needed because I was like, I am not commuting to freaking downtown Miami again. I'm not going to spend an hour and a half in traffic
Yeah.
for this little job that pays me 51K. What I wanted, and talking about intentionality, when I was leaving higher ed and went into healthcare, there was three things on my list. And those three things were I have to have DEI in my job title. Like I know that my next job, I always knew that that kind of first job out of healthcare was temporary,
Yeah.
but in order to like go vertical, I needed to go lateral. So I'm like, I needed to have DEI on my resume. I needed to make more money because I was making jack shit, like 51K with, yeah. And then the other things like I needed to be close to my house. So I did
Mhm.
get those three things. I forgot to ask. I should probably like my job. So,
Nobody
so
likes their
yes, I
job.
was
Let's be honest.
that is true. Yeah, right. Or like, I should probably at least not hate it.
You could
But
tolerate it.
yes, yes. And it was not an environment that I could tolerate long
Yeah.
term. So that's why I was only there 10 months. In my next job, so again, once I'm in healthcare and I'm like, I need to get out of here. What I wanted was DEI program manager at a tech company. When I tell you that I couldn't even name tech companies outside of like the FANG stocks.
Hmm.
Somebody asked me, "Oh, so what kind of tech company are you looking for?" And I was like, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google." And she was like, "Carla, there are way more companies. Like there's a bigger world in tech than just those five companies."
Hmm.
And so that's when I first learned about like big tech and startups and pre-IPO and the different sectors within the tech industry. But all of this I didn't know. I learned this in those 35 coffee chats and in those events where I was meeting those people. And then, of course, like I was Googling, like if somebody would say something, I would go and Google it. Like I had to learn so much. I learned so much in those 3 months. And that's how I knew that I wanted to be like a DEI program manager in a tech company. And that's how I knew what the salary was that I was looking for, that it was totally within my reach.
So how much time did you have between the healthcare job and the tech job?
10 months.
Okay, so
So
one
yeah.
of the things, yeah, I want to ask about that because obviously one of the things that people have anxiety about is like, oh, they're going to ask me, like, why the hell am I leaving this job so quick? How do I actually have this conversation and not sound like a potential flight risk?
Okay. So I love that question because people ask me that all the time too. Like, oh, is it bad to job hop? I'm like, I don't know. Is it bad to be miserable and stay at a job that you're underpaid and overworked? Pick one. So I was a little bit concerned, but I was mostly driven by the fact that I knew that I was wasting away. Like I knew that I had so much more to offer. I'm telling you, the thing that sparked these like 3 months of coffee chats was when my boss shut me out of a project. So it wasn't even that she laughed at me and said, ha ha ha, that's not going to happen. That was like the actual catalyst that got me into action. Cause it was like this moment where she shut me out of a project. And I was like, I absolutely have no future here. And I was like, I need to get out of here. So even though it had only been 7 months at that time, like I think I initially had at like the 6 month mark when she laughed at me, I was like, I just need to make it a year. I just need to make it a year and then I can get out of here. And then once she shut me out of a project, and I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm getting out of here now. And so for me, when people ask me that question, I would always phrase it as like, oh, I'm looking for my next challenge, or I'm looking for a little bit more, what was it that I would say? Strategy, because my role was basically entry level. And so I would share, whenever I got that question in these coffee chats and in job interviews, it's like, oh, I see that you just started at this role. Yeah, it's not the right fit. I'm looking for something that has more of a strategic impact. And so as long as you have a good reason that you can stand behind. And here's the thing that I tell my clients all the time. It's like, job interviewing is easier when you're actually being honest and authentic. The way that I would tell my friends is like, yeah, I'm decorating the cafeteria. Like I would send them snap. I'm like, just like, I'm literally decorating the conference room for Hispanic Heritage Month. I don't need a master's degree for this. This is how Carla's using her master's degree for that. And so I did want to have something that was more of a strategic influence.
I think what happens for a lot of people too is they get so caught up in their existing title that they have a hard time kind of translating what that next job title is that they want to pursue. So like let's say somebody's a teacher. I'm like, well, I teach math. Like what the hell else can I do besides teach math? So like what would you give as far as advice for how to retitle your skill set into a potential pivot?
Yeah, absolutely. The very first thing to do is to just Google what are potential career opportunities for transitioning teachers? Because even something as simple as Googling that can give you answers. I mean, and now we have Chat GPT. I used, it's like put in your resume and said, what are some career opportunities that I have that are not in education? So I will say that there is one thing that might be a little bit tricky, which is translating that resume and using the words that are transferable, like you're doing these things in these fields. What words did this other field look like? And that's one of the things that you can ask when you're having those conversations with people. And you can even ask ChatGPT, or you can even slide into my DMs and ask me. It's all good.
I love
You
ChatGPT, let me tell you. It is such a resource for, like, just getting those juices flowing in your brain and just making you see different perspectives. I have my side hustle students do the exact same exercise where it's just like you're typing in your career and you're asking ChatGPT to tell you, like, what are different side hustles that you could use based on the experience and the skill set that you have. And a lot of people are just like, "Oh my god, I didn't even think about this. I didn't even make this connection." So you just never know. You gotta just give yourself an opportunity to brainstorm.
Yes, 100%. And like give yourself an opportunity to be new at something, to
Yeah,
learn this new skill.
yeah.
And like just remember, you do not need another degree to make more money. You just need to be in a higher paying field.
Facts. I love that. Okay, so obviously, I talked to a lot of people, and even in my book, I wrote a whole chapter about the importance of salary negotiation and just like making more money because at the end of the day, money's power. And there are certain careers that have income caps, but at the end of the day, it really does require some creativity when it comes to increasing your earning power. So, how do we get more comfortable with the idea of advocating for ourselves? Because it can be very scary to ask for more money.
Oh, 100%. So first of all, practice that we're not on the phone mumbling like I was. You know? Yeah, so practice saying the words out loud. That is key. The
Yeah.
second thing is arm yourself with the facts. I mentioned what I did, the research that I did in order to like figure out how much I should have been making. And I saw that I should have been making like at least 95K. So arm yourself with the facts. It's like, all right, you look for jobs in a similar field. So there's kind of like three things that you look at: the education that's required, the years of experience that is required, and the deliverables that you're going to be doing. Obviously, if you're going to be like underwater oil drilling, that's going to be like a completely different pay
Yeah.
than if you're going to be like waitressing. So yes, just look at the deliverables of the project. And then you're going to start to see patterns. One of the things that I show my students is this salary benchmarking Excel sheet that we use that help them figure out what they should be making. And once you do that, that's where you're going to get that confidence, because it's never easy, but it does get easier. It does get easier once you realize that they're not hiring you to do your job. It is just an exchange of your skills and your experience for their money.
Do you have any favorite tools for how you do that research process and finding out like how much you should be getting paid? Because obviously so much of the struggle is just like even knowing what the hell that number should be.
I have an entire playlist on salary negotiations for my podcast. I can
Ooh,
definitely do that.
love that. Yeah, we'll make
Y-
sure to link that in
Yes.
the episode
So
show
I
notes.
can share that with you. Yeah, thank you so much. And you know what? You're just inspiring me to make this template just like as a freebie available to all people.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. Because it really is an art form, right? Negotiation is absolutely something that does not come inherent to most people. It's something you need to practice. One of the things that I recommend folks to practice, like especially if they're getting ready for a salary negotiation situation, is like look for other opportunities to negotiate where it's not such a big, like monumental thing. Like for example, let's say your Hulu subscription is coming up for a renewal and they're talking about, well, we gave you the introductory rate for the first year, but it's going to double now. Get on the phone and say, you know what? I'm going to cancel my Hulu contract unless you guys give me another year of introductory pricing. And you'd be surprised how often these companies are like, well, shit, okay, we're going to lose a customer over like what, $50, $60? Fine. Yeah, we'd love to have you on for another year at this introductory price. Like that shit is so much more common than you think. And I think what happens is we feel kind of gross. We feel kind of icky sometimes about just like being the Karens, if you will, of just like, well, I don't need to talk to the manager. And at the end of the day, like this is how rich people operate. Wealthy
Oh,
people
yeah.
do not accept the price. They do not accept the set price of anything. Everything is
Mhm.
up for negotiation. And so we need to just get very comfortable advocating for ourselves because it translates to all different avenues of your life.
Absolutely. And especially at work. So
Mm,
I guess maybe one quick tip about negotiating salary specifically, I would say maybe try to stick within 10%. That
mm,
tends to be where the room for negotiation is. So let's say you get offered like $100,000 a year, and it's like, well, I was kind of looking between 105 and 110. Kind of also giving them a range. So stick within 10%, give them a range. That often tends to work. But then that practice negotiating, I advocate for myself all the time at work.
mhm,
Every job I've ever had, when I worked at like rinky-dink nonprofits that had like $0, I've always been able to go to like conferences and professional developments paid for by my organizations
mm.
because I ask. I'm realizing now that like all that practice asking of like, hey, there's this event is good because it reminds you that companies have money,
They sure
and that
do.
you deserve to be compensated. So it creates evidence. Yeah, it creates evidence for you that you deserve to be compensated. So once you're practicing, like asking them, like, can you pay for my professional development? I need an upgrade of this software. I need to upgrade a laptop. Once you get practice asking that, it does become a lot easier to, when you're faced with negotiating a salary, to ask for that too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we are in a situation where you ask for more money and you're told no. What are your options? And how do you decide if like salary needs to be the pinnacle of success in this negotiation or if like maybe something like work-life balance or benefits can supersede the salary increase?
Okay, I love this question. So I am going to give your listeners a little preview of a podcast episode that I'll be releasing soon. I one time got a job offer for $135,000. And I was like, can you guys pay me 150? And they said no. And then they said, we're actually going to rescind the offer.
Oh shit.
Yes.
Mm.
So I'll send you, yeah, once that episode is published, I'll send it to you
Hmm.
because there was a lot of lessons learned. But you know what? It wasn't a fair offer, and I stand by what I did. I
Mm.
was like, no, was not a fair offer. And just because it was more money than I had ever been offered does not mean that it was a fair offer. So that's the first thing that I would say. Before you negotiate, you need to recognize whether or not it's a fair offer.
Hmm.
So if the base salary is like a good offer, and like and it's firm and they say no, we don't have flexibility, there's other things you can negotiate. You can negotiate, first of all, time off. It's like, yeah, actually I want to start in 4 weeks, or I might, so that's the first thing. Or I want to start now and then go on vacation immediately, so which is
It's always good
what
to
I've
say,
done at
well, I had
jobs.
this trip planned already, so I just want to make
Yes.
sure, it's good.
Exactly, 100. That's actually what I did at my last job. I
Yeah.
started, and then like a week later, I was like on PTO. Woohoo! So that's another thing. Again, you can also negotiate. So time off, salary, depending on the company, you can negotiate stock.
Mm.
So I helped a friend of mine. There was no budging in terms of the base pay, but they gave her an extra 10 grand in stock.
Hmm.
Let's see, somebody else, I was working with her, and I was like, wait, if you're relocating to this, like if you're relocating, then they need to give you a relocation allowance. And so she was like, all right, she took that to the boss, like, I want to negotiate a relocation allowance. She was moving. Their policy was like, well, if you move less than 4 hours, we don't pay that. But
Hmm.
here, we'll just give you more money in your initial offer, in your
Okay.
initial salary.
Hmm.
Yeah. So instead of getting more money once, she got more money every time.
Yeah.
So there's like other things that you can negotiate. If the base pay is firm, then yes, there's other forms of compensation. So I definitely encourage folks to think about compensation as a whole.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, like work-life balance. And it's like, oh, okay, is there any opportunity for, like a flexible schedule with a hybrid workplace? If it's 2 days remote, 3 days in the office, can that be flipped the other way? Can it be
Hmm.
3 days remote and 2 days in the office? Can you get a phone allowance or an internet allowance if you're working from home? Can you get more professional development? So those are like some of the things that even if the offer, so first and foremost, like make sure that you know how to recognize that offer, whether or not it's solid or not. And then think about what are other ways that you can get compensated, either initially or once you decide to start.
Yeah, I love that advice. I know when my last corporate job, I had $100,000 in my head as like starting salary, and I was not going to accept less than that. So they came with an offer of 95. I said, I really wanted to make 100. Can we make that happen? And they initially offered me 2 weeks of PTO. And I was like, well, I'm coming from a job where I get 3 weeks of PTO. So like, can we match that? And it was like, boom, boom. So there is that room to negotiate. It's usually in most scenarios, it's never a super firm offer unless you already know that you're like at the end of the pay scale, for the type of job. So just that awareness and kind of that knowledge of the industry standard is important. So I want to know, because it's been a while since I've had to do a resume, but how have resumes changed since, I don't know, maybe like we were in our 20s or something? Like, what's the new way to get hired? Because now we have all these electronic online job boards, and it's just so much more like information we need to be submitting nowadays. So what should we be doing to optimize resumes?
A lot. There's
Mm.
a few things that we can be doing. I think, do I have a resume playlist? No, but I do have a resume episode. Here's the thing though. I'll answer your question in just a second, but I'll preface it by saying that your resume is the least important part of your job search
Oh
strategy.
shit. Okay.
Yeah, like it is not about the resume at all. Before, like you can spend all day optimizing your resume, but if you're not talking to people and making sure that people are seeing your resume, getting your resume in front of hiring managers, getting referrals, like making sure that your name is spoken in rooms when you're not in, then it doesn't matter if you have this like mythical perfect resume, because if no one sees it, then who cares?
Right. And there's so
Yeah,
many
so like
like tools now that companies are using to like automatically screen out resumes. So you might not even get seen by a person, right?
Oh, 100%. I've heard of companies getting 1,200 applications in 24 hours. I mean, this was like one of the big social media companies. So, like 1,200 applications in less than 24 hours. I've heard of other companies that pull down their applications after like 5 hours because they reached their 300 applicant max. I'm telling you that just focusing on your resume and applying is screaming into the void. In order to get a job, especially a high paying job, you need to be talking to people. You
Mm.
need to be telling them, hey, I'm looking for a job. You need to be telling everyone that you know that you're looking for a job, and
Hmm.
have them think of you and be like, oh, hey. so and so is quitting. And I think you said you're looking for this kind of job. Do you want to apply? Like, that's how people get jobs.
Mhm.
But that being said, once they look at your resume, so once you're sure that someone can look at your resume, first things, I actually do have a free resume and template guide that I can share with you because I actually, the day that I made it, I was just so mad. I had to talk to someone and his resume was so bad. And it was bad in the exact same way that every other resume was. I was like, oh my God.
Why are you doing this?
Yes. So I ended up making this like fantastic freebie from it just because I was so frustrated of like giving people the same advice on their resume.
Mhm.
So just, high level, your home address doesn't need to be on it. Like every
Oh,
single, yeah, no, yeah, who no one needs to know where you
it's
live.
true. Like, you don't need to know where the fuck I'm at. We're
Yeah.
not even cool like that yet.
Exactly. No one needs to know where you live. The most important thing that you can do with your resume is communicate your value
Mm,
right away. If you got your most recent degree more than 5 years ago, your education goes at the bottom. They don't care where you went to school. You're not applying to grad school. They care what you can do for them. So, like the very first line of your summary needs to tell them this is what you can do. So,
what's in
like
it
if
for me?
exactly.
Mhm.
And that's the thing. Every line on your resume. So for every work experience, you should have around 3 to 5 bullet points, and they should be X statements. So it's not like, who I sat there and answered the phones, but it's like I provided excellent customer service to like 50 people.
Mhm.
Just yesterday, I was working with a client who was telling me about some of the things that she's doing. And I'm like, wait, so you're managing an event for 50 C-suite members of Fortune 500 companies, and that's not on your resume?
Mm,
Like, what?
mhm.
Like, you need to brag on your resume. You need to like adopt the persona of a mediocre white man. You need to name drop like there's no tomorrow. And again, it's not about the things that you did, it's about the impact that you had.
Mhm.
Like one of my clients, she got her company out of an IRS audit. She saved in millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And you know what she had on her resume? Created a new filing system,
Oh
blah, blah.
God.
And I'm like, what? And so,
Jeez.
we fixed her resume. She actually ended up making $65,000 more at her next job once we fixed her resume.
Wow.
So, yeah, there is power in talking about the impact. I'll send you the link, but it's thefirstgencoach.com/resume. And I have this all in a template. And, like, so please make sure you don't have any, like, your home address doesn't need to be there. Also,
Mhm.
another misconception that I hear from people is that it's like, oh, what if it's like volunteer experience? I'm like, well, put it on your resume. Truly, I love what I do because I get to meet so many amazing people. One of my clients had an entire like gallery exhibit at a local museum of like Mayan and Mesoamerican culture. And she
Wow.
didn't have that on her resume. I was like, oh my
Jeez.
God. Like there is so much excellence. So that's the thing that I guess just in general, I would summarize by owning your excellence.
Mm.
So yeah, just owning your excellence, talk about it, be about it. The things that your family is proud of, the things that like that you're doing that are really amazing, all that goes on your resume. Another thing, things that you did before you got your degree, that also goes on your resume. That's, so many things. Like it's just the impact that you're having. Make sure you put that there so that when somebody sees it, it's like, oh wow, that's fantastic.
I love that advice. And, I think it's important for folks too to understand you're probably going to have to customize your application process for like each job. It's not about using a generic resume because each job that you're applying to you're going to want to highlight different things just based on what they're asking for the responsibilities of the role. So being okay with having to do that customization work, I think is important because it's going to take more time, but it's probably gonna be better off than just, like, blanket applying to 100 jobs with the same exact shit and expecting a result.
Yeah, if you're applying to shit jobs, you're gonna get a shit job, like
Facts.
yeah, so I truly like if you're really looking to get a high paying job, make those six figures, then you need to
Mm,
narrow down what you're looking for. Because if one day you're applying to like strategic events managers, and then another day you're applying to like social media manager, and then another day you're applying to like compliance, you're going to get so burnt out
yeah.
editing all your resumes so often. So just like pick one job family, and then you will have to make like a minor tweak or two, but it shouldn't take more than 20 minutes because if not, you are going to burn yourself out. And that's just
Mhm.
not worth it. It's not
Yeah.
worth it for these jobs.
No, it's not. It's not worth it for any job for you to be stressing yourself out and losing hair. I wanna know from you because obviously so much of what we talk about requires confronting things like imposter syndrome and the icky feelings that come with bragging about your accomplishments, right? That's so not inherent to our culture, especially as women of color. So, what advice do you have for folks to be able to navigate the mind drama that can come with like deciding that you want to advocate for yourself in this way?
So the first part is what we talked about before is just like
Mm,
practicing advocating for yourself in those small ways, because
yeah.
that's how you build the muscle of like knowing that you deserve to be compensated. You deserve to uphold your boundaries. You deserve to say, actually, I'm not available to stay until 6 o'clock. My workday ends at 4:30.
Facts.
Yeah. So that's the first thing, like practice little by little, because that way you become someone
Yeah.
who knows they're worthy of compensation. Second thing is, it is going to be uncomfortable. It is
Hmm.
going to be very uncomfortable, but I would rather be uncomfortable and making six figures than comfortable and still
Under
at my
fucking
51.
paid.
Yes, yeah, absolutely underpaid. And I really believe that every Black and brown woman can get a 30K raise and just start scratching the surface of being
Mm,
appropriately compensated.
mm.
So I absolutely like yeah, that imposter syndrome. Just know that we are socialized to feel this way. We're told to feel this way. We're told that we're not good enough. We're told that we have to work twice as hard to get half as far.
Yeah.
And enough. At one point, we have to say enough. Your parents did not move to this country for you to be overworked at an office job instead of a physical job.
Mm.
So if like they moved here for a better life, and that means you've got to advocate for yourself. Like if our parents are like crossing borders or like giving up their homeland, learning new languages, going from being like doctors and lawyers to coming and like selling flowers on the street. And all you got to do is put on your big girl pants and say, hey, actually, I led that project that brought this company $150 million. Then do it.
Pay me
you
my
know
fucking money.
Yes, exactly. Like, yeah, it can be uncomfortable to brag, but tough it out. Make a list of everything that you've done. One of the first things that I do with my clients is like, what's a time when you felt really invigorated with your work, when you lost yourself? And this is how I find these gold nuggets. I use this example of $150 million because one of my clients, I was like, so what's a time, I kind of walked her through the exercise, and she was managing a whole bunch of grants. And I was like, have you ever added up how much grant money you're managing? And so we did it together, and she was managing $150 million, like of federal taxpayer funds. And I was like, oh my God, if I did that, I would be so annoying. And that would be like the first thing I said to people. I'm like, hi, I'm Carla. I manage $150 million. And so she went and took that, and she worked in the government job, obviously. She went and she took that, and she got her like third raise in 18 months. That doesn't
Wow.
happen in a government job, but once she was able to quantify it, so quantify it, practice saying it out loud, and then just know that you deserve it. It's not bragging if it's just the truth.
That was a whole gem that just got dropped, y'all. I hope that this has inspired you to advocate for yourself, to ask for more money because we are tired of being overworked and underpaid. Carla, thank you so much for being here. I want you to tell us where we can find you, how you work with clients, because I know you are going to be motivating a lot of people to start speaking up and getting paid what they deserve.
Yes, thank you so much, Janice. So you can find me on Instagram at Carla the First Gen Coach, or you can find me on my podcast, the First Gen Coach Podcast. So I have a couple of freebies. Like mentioned, I have my resume freebie. I also have a training on how to land a high paying job. All of that is in my welcome links. And I do work with clients one-on-one for 6 months, where we really like find your strengths. We figure out what your strengths are, what your zone of genius is, and then we turn around and get you a job where you're making 30K more.
Hell yeah, because the world needs way more women of color who are out here getting the bag.
Yes, absolutely. Remember, the more you have, the more you have to give. All right.
That's it. I love it. Carla, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you for having me.